Hey guys, Kusha here with Exerscribe TV, and today I want to talk to you about correcting your muscular imbalances. So when it comes to working out, one of the first things you're going to want to do is really fix your muscular imbalances and your dysfunction. And we all have them because, every rep that you do imperfectly, and every time you sit at your desk all day or, do the same repetitive motions, you're building motor patterns. So we'll talk about that in a second. Basically, you're building the same repetitive patterns for the brain to learn how to do movement wrong. And it's important to correct that so that every rep that you do, especially when you start adding load and adding resistance, that you actually maximize the benefit from that by building a strong foundation and kind of resetting and recalibrating your foundation. So the first thing you want to think about is force coupling. So if you think about movement, no movement is really done in isolation. Muscle groups work together to produce force. Later on, we'll talk about the anatomy meridians and the different lines that connect the body diagonally, because the body works in diagonal slings. But we'll talk about that later. What I want you to learn is really this whole concept of force coupling. So if I'm doing a squat, for example, I'm getting force coupling between the glutes and the hamstrings to produce force to dynamically load the body on the axial skeleton. If we think about what happens when the body has hypertonic muscles, like for example, if I have hypertonic hip flexors from being really good at sitting all day, the consequence of that is I have altered force coupling. So now my synergists don't work properly. They don't fire and help create better force and help distribute and disperse forces better. And that's what increases your likelihood for injuries, especially in the spine or in the joints, or muscle pulling, muscle spasm, that sort of thing. The next thing I want to talk about is length-tension relationships. So if I do half reps, then what happens over time is I get really good at being stuck in that position. So if I always curl to a half of a full range of motion, what will happen is over time I'm going to have these slightly bent elbows everywhere I go, no matter what. And what happens is when you have that slight flexion, for example, in the elbow from half repping all the time, your triceps have a altered length tension relationship. Normally, you have to have these cross bridges between the muscle fibers that have to be an optimal length so they can grab appropriately. So that way when you're doing an exercise, essentially what's called actin and myosin, these filaments in the muscle, they attach to each other. They create these cross bridges and attach. If the muscle is hypertonic and too shortened, the capability it has to fully contract is inhibited. And vice versa, in the triceps, if my arm is slightly bent, the opportunity for those things to grab on and contract and create those cross bridges is also obstructed. So we have to reset those length tension relationships. And then really the last thing we'll talk about is synergistic dominance. And this kind of goes into the first two things that I talked about. So synergistic dominance is where the synergist muscles, so those secondary muscle groups, do the primary mover's job. So this is why, those people who do a lot of bench press, their chest never gets bigger, because the shoulders, the anterior deltoid, which is supposed to be a synergist, takes over the role of the primary mover, which is the pectoral muscles, because the pecs aren't activating. And that's because of the skeletal position, the structural position you've gotten fixed into is thoracic flexion. If you're like this all day and then you go to the bench press and you do bench, well, guess what? Your pecs are in a position where they're essentially inefficient. So your body has to basically distribute those forces and use muscles in some fashion to get the load up. So it ends up using those synergists like the shoulders. And that happens in a lot of exercises that you'll do if you don't correct and reset those functions. So the main things you'll want to do to help kind of reset these things is pretty simple. Is really, number one, move in different planes of motion. Get out of this sagittal and frontal plane. We already do enough forward movement and we already do enough lateral raises. We need to be doing more things with rotation, and try to get up on 2 feet. Try not to be sitting down on machines. Number two, try to use a full range of motion on everything you do. Don't come down halfway, come all the way down, lock out, get a full rep to make sure that you don't have altered length tension relationships. And then number three, really think about the muscles you're trying to activate when you're doing your exercises. Make sure that you're really engaging the intended muscle groups and not overusing the synergists. Later on this week, we'll talk more about other drills and things you can do to kind of biohack your body and your brain to help further recalibrate and reset your nervous system and strengthen your foundation. That's it for today. Thanks for tuning in on Exerscribe TV. See you soon.